Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much, Frank, and thank you for all your efforts over the years, especially on the topic that you've just discussed, which I think is something that is going to claim all of our attention more and more in the future. I'd like to talk about the question of American national security, and I will be happy when I finish here to answer some questions on the subject. I'm sure I won't cover everything I'd like to cover, so if I don't get into it in my opening remarks, don't be discouraged. Feel free to ask about it. But I think it's important, even at a time of great economic difficulty for the United States, while our attention in many respects is focused on what's happening in Washington, or maybe what's not happening in Washington, as we approach the threatened default on our sovereign debt obligations. We are obviously already in a campaign season for the 2012 election. Some would say our president has been in the campaign mode since November of 2008. And it is a time when obviously people's attention is directed to the choice that we will make next year. And with the economic situation being the way it is, many people would prefer only to talk about economics, the intricacies of how you get legislation on the debt ceiling through Congress and who's cooperating and who's not cooperating, or how we deal with Part B of Medicare and how we deal with farm subsidies, all issues of great significance to be sure. But I think the overarching issue that should be on our radar screen, the question of how we defend America, I'm afraid has in a way gotten lost in the shuffle. Now, we all hope that whoever is nominated to oppose President Obama next year will basically hold the right values when it comes to the whole range of issues that our country is going to face. But in large part because the president himself, for going on 2.5 years now, has not wanted to talk about national security, we have lost the salience of that issue in our overall national debate. And as a consequence, many Republicans, many conservatives have stopped talking about it as well. I think this is a great risk going forward because many of the people seeking the nomination, who are good and decent and competent, have never had much experience in national security issues, so that their instincts have never been tested as decision makers, and we don't know who their advisors are, and we don't know how they will perform in a real crisis. You think we're in a crisis now about coming up on the debt ceiling. Imagine a crisis where we face terrorist or rogue states with nuclear weapons. That is the definition of crisis. And that is why, however the politics of the next year and a half play out, to me it's so critical that we restore America's national security to the place it ought to have in our hierarchy of priorities, and that's right at the very top. So I just want to take a few minutes here today to talk about why we have fallen away from that priority under our current leadership in Washington, what some of those dangers are that we're being exposed to, and then a little bit about what to do about it. The fact is that however much we care about the profligacy of our federal government, and there's a lot there to care about, however much we want our economy to get out of the ditch that it's in, and in fact being kept there because of the policies that our president's pursuing, the fact is that national security is key to our independence, our freedom, and peace and security over the long term. The independence of our country itself to preserve our Constitution and our sovereignty. Freedom against foreign economic penetration and dominance. And peace and security by protecting us against threats from terrorism and the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, nuclear, chemical, and biological. Now, foreign policy and national security play out very differently than the domestic agenda. Things happen out there that we can't necessarily foresee. They don't fit a legislative schedule. In fact, it's a lot like Humphrey Bogart in Casablanca when he said, "It seems that destiny has taken a hand." That's the way national security issues work. And there's a lot going on that our administration is simply not dealing with. And this, to me, gets to the crux of the problem and why it is to the advantage of conservatives seeking federal office to stress national security. We have a crisis of leadership in the White House. We have a president who's not qualified to lead us in national security. Let's stop pretending otherwise. What is it about Obama that makes him so dangerous? The first is he has no particular interest in national security affairs. This distinguishes him from every American president, Democrat or Republican, since Franklin Roosevelt on December 7th, 1941. Obama just doesn't care about these issues. It's not what gets him up in the morning. It's not what motivates him. He cares about transforming our domestic economy, and he is well on the way to doing it. He said he wanted to change America. He's not had complete success in his first 2.5 years, but guarantee it, if he gets another term, he's going to continue to pursue it, and he's going to continue to ignore what's going on overseas. And that ties into the second characteristic. He doesn't see the rest of the world as terribly threatening or challenging to America. He doesn't like to talk about what a mere 2.5 years ago we called the global war on terror. Now, Frank Gaffney's just helped explain why that war is actually being fought on the domestic front as well. But events all over the world show that the terrorist threat has not diminished. It has metastasized. It's different than what it was on 9/11. But even with the death, richly deserved, of Osama bin Laden, the threat has not diminished. We have a president who said in the 2008 campaign that Iran was a small country. So what's the problem if it gets nuclear weapons? You know, even small countries with nuclear weapons can threaten the United States and threaten our friends and allies around the world. We have a president who thinks that American decline is natural, is inevitable, is not something to be feared. And all of this marks him as the first president since Roosevelt who not only doesn't get motivated in the morning by national security, but whose view of national security is entirely different from that long line of other presidents. And this is the third characteristic. National security to President Obama comes primarily from his devout belief in multilateralism as the protection for America. That the United Nations and multilateral diplomacy generally is something that we can rely on to protect our vital national interest overseas. You can see this in a whole range of activities. Every domestic issue that motivates many of you here in this room has a counterpart in the international system of people trying to find ways to use international institutions and multilateral diplomacy to impose an outcome here in the United States. You care about the right to life, You probably then should be aware that in multilateral forums all over the world, people are constantly talking about something they call reproductive health. Now, if you think about that for a minute, I'm not exactly sure what that should mean, but in the minds of those who talk about it, who want to guarantee it, it means the right to abortion. And our diplomats are out there on a daily basis dealing with this as if it's some foreign policy issue. You care about the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. Out there in the international community, they're debating what they call an arms trade treaty that sounds like it's a way of dealing with illicit transfers of weapons in the international system, but where the real hidden agenda is gun control in the United States. Make no mistake about it. We all are concerned about issues dealing with the environment. As Americans, it's entirely appropriate we are, but we now find that the administration and its supporters in the Senate are once again pushing for the ratification of the Law of the Sea Treaty, something that keeps rising like Dracula out of its grave, to try and push this through to put the entire seabed of the world under United Nations control. And try and codify rules that are unquestionably going to inhibit our ability as Americans to exploit the resources out in the deep seabed and beneath. This is something that arises in Washington even while the Senate today is debating the debt ceiling. I know for a fact that there are senators who are, while all this is going on, talking about the Law of the Sea Treaty. Now, this faith in multilateralism is also tied in directly with a real faith in international law. And as a law-abiding people, talking about international law has a sort of surface appeal. But make no mistake, what international law really means is imposing constraints on the United States. For example, as we watch now in conflicts around the world, let's go back to the conflict in Kosovo in the former Yugoslavia in 1998, 1999, when NATO decided to use force to prevent the Serbs from massacring the Kosovar Albanians. Now, you can debate the wisdom of that decision, and I was not in favor of it, but there was no question that NATO had the ability to make that decision. That was not the predominant view at the United Nations, where no resolution authorizing that use of force would have gotten through the Security Council, and where the Secretary General of the United Nations said the following: unless the Security Council is restored to its preeminent position as the sole source of legitimacy on the use of force, we are on a dangerous path to anarchy. Now, that statement was greeted with yawns in New York because that's what almost everybody there believes in. The Security Council is the sole source of legitimacy on the use of force. Well, tell that to James Madison. The fact is, and this is the fundamental issue, it seems to me, to deal with against the Obama administration. On this earth, there is no higher authority than the U.S. Constitution. Not the UN Charter, not international law, not what the Security Council does, the Constitution. I'd love for a reporter to ask President Obama if he thinks international law trumps the Constitution. I'd love to have a sincere answer from the President, although, of course, we're not going to get it. And this reveals, it seems to me, what's really at the core of Obama's value system. He does not believe in American exceptionalism, which is why I've characterized him as our first post-American president. Now, where does this American exceptionalism comes from? A lot of people on the left in this country, overseas, say it's a feeling that Americans have, a feeling of superiority to everybody else in the world. It's what justifies American belligerence. I don't think it's that way at all. I don't think it's a feeling of superiority. It's a feeling about how we are different as a nation. And it came right at the very beginning when John Winthrop, the first governor of the Plymouth colony, quoting from Scripture, said, "We must consider that we shall be as a city upon a hill." And as Reagan used to say, a shining city on a hill, the New Jerusalem. Now, this is not something that Americans alone came up with to justify feelings of superiority. Who was the first person to use the phrase American exceptionalism? None other than a Frenchman, Alexis de Tocqueville, who said in Democracy in America, "The position of the Americans is therefore quite exceptional, and it may be believed that no democratic people will ever be placed in a similar one." So de Tocqueville's insight shows how, from the outset, American exceptionalism was noticed around the world. What does the president say when he's asked about American exceptionalism? In his first trip to Europe, he was asked that question, and he said this: "Yes, I believe in American exceptionalism, just as the Brits believe in British exceptionalism and the Greeks believe in Greek exceptionalism." Now look, there are 193 members of the United Nations. Why stop there? Just as the Papua New Guineans believe in Papua New Guinean exceptionalism, just as the Zanzibaris believe in Zanzibar I mean, you can go on. If 193 countries are exceptional, obviously nobody is exceptional. And that, I think, is really the point. It was summed up years ago because Obama is not the first leader from the American left to hold these views. He just, unfortunately, is the first one to be president. George H.W. Bush said in 1988 about his opponent, Michael Dukakis, he said, "Dukakis sees America as another pleasant country on the UN roll call somewhere between Albania and Zimbabwe." You could say the same thing about Obama. We're just one of 193. Now, what is the appropriate conservative response? Well, it's certainly not that we do nothing. It's certainly not isolationism. But obviously, neither is it multilateralism either. We're not out there to make the world safe for democracy. We're out there, as Theodore Roosevelt said, first to make the world safe for ourselves. And this is where the Obama agenda has caused such devastation already. In a time when he is spending unbelievable amounts of money on domestic stimulus legislation, the only department in government that's under a strict requirement that to increase spending in one area requires cutting it in another is the Defense Department. He has already succeeded in cutting $400 billion from the Defense Department budget, and he has instructed his Secretary of Defense to find another $400 billion to cut. In the Reid plan, tied to the increase in the debt ceiling, now under consideration in the Senate, there's a further cut of $900 billion. Coincidentally, exactly equal to the stimulus in 2009. Now, one can hope that our negotiators, as they work their way through this issue over the weekend, eliminate those defense cuts. But when you hear on the media that the Boehner plan has cuts and the Reid plan has cuts and they're not that dissimilar, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Boehner's bill actually protects the Defense Department budget. Reid's bill does precisely the opposite. And I want to say, and I believe this very strongly, there is a qualitative difference between a dollar well spent on American defense and any other dollar spent by the federal government. I'm not sure how many other dollars spent by the federal government can be characterized as well spent, but it is a false economy of the worst kind, to say that we're going to draw down on our defense budget at a time of enormous challenges for the United States around the world. And let me just discuss some of those challenges, because our president is not dealing with them. He has been obsessed since taking office by pressing what he calls the reset button in our relations with Russia. He said when he came into office, he had inherited bad bilateral relations. Well, in fact, he had. Why were the relations between Russia and the United States bad? It can be explained essentially by one quotation from Russia's current Prime Minister, Vladimir Putin, former president, likely president again. Putin said a few years ago, when he was still president, the collapse of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. Now, I think most of us think the collapse of the Soviet Union was a great way to end the 20th century. But that's obviously not Putin's view, and he has spent his time in office trying to re-establish Russian hegemony in the space of the former Soviet Union. He provoked a crisis with the tiny Republic of Georgia in August of 2008, basically taking two provinces away from control of the democratic government of Georgia. What did candidate Obama say back in August of 2008, faced with this military confrontation between Russia and Georgia? He called on both sides to exercise restraint. I mean, what can you say? This is the government we're trying to press the reset button with. And what have we done? We have given up missile defense sites in Poland and the Czech Republic, designed to protect not our friends in Europe, designed to protect us. And not even against launches, missile launches from Russia, to protect us against missile launches from Iran. And in exchange for this, what did we get from the Russians? Nothing. Nothing. We agreed to a so-called New START arms control treaty with Russia that will constrain America's nuclear defense capabilities while giving the Russians time to build up their capabilities fueled by high petroleum revenues. We have watched Russia reassert itself in the independent republics. We have stood by while Russia flew political cover in the UN Security Council for the nuclear weapons programs of North Korea and Iran. And what has been the Obama administration's response to that? Just a few weeks ago, where NATO forces are active, our alliance, actively engaged in operations against Muammar Gaddafi, in a campaign that was opposed by Russia. They abstained in the Security Council. They have criticized us relentlessly for the past 4 months. And under this president, there's a lot to criticize for the way that operation's been conducted, not the criticisms Russia's been making. But after all of that, about 10 days ago, the president invited Russia to mediate between NATO and Gaddafi. Whatever happened to Switzerland? You know, when you need a neutral country, we've asked the Russians to step in between our alliance and our military adversary. It just boggles the mind. And yet, what kind of discussion do we have about the growing menace of Russia's refurbished nuclear and ballistic missile capabilities, its assertiveness, not just now in the space of the former Soviet Union, but in Eastern and Central Europe? Nothing. They're still looking for that reset button to push. And what about China, which is increasing its nuclear capabilities, building a blue water navy that will challenge American predominance in the Western Pacific for the first time since World War II, that will bring many other nations, including allies of ours like Japan and South Korea and Taiwan, into grave peril? Nothing. We do nothing. We have no China policy. And these broad strategic issues are questions that we're not discussing in our national political debate. Of course, they don't affect us today, but they will affect us soon, and they will affect our children and our grandchildren for a long time. But there are issues that do affect us today. Let's just take, as one example, the nuclear weapons programs pursued by North Korea and Iran. What has the administration done to stop the North Korean nuclear weapons program over the last 2.5 years? Answer: nothing. The North Koreans continue to build that program. They are capable of selling nuclear weapons to anybody with hard currency to buy them, including terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda. They have actively cooperated with Iran, both on ballistic missiles and I think on the nuclear field as well. They're a clear threat to our allies in South Korea and Japan, and as their ballistic missile capacities grow, they are getting close to the capability of delivering nuclear weapons anywhere in the world, including on the territory of the United States. That's why our missile defense program, which the President is busily deconstructing, is so important to us. And yet we don't talk about that at the national level either. And on Iran, which is very, very close to the point of achieving its 20-year-long objective to get nuclear weapons, what is the President doing? He's still doing what he said in his inaugural address when he said, "We will extend an open hand to the likes of Iran and North Korea if only they will unclench their fist." What has been the response of Iran to that? To build additional facilities to enrich uranium, to launch the Bushehr nuclear reactor, which in due course will provide plutonium and its spent fuel, another route to nuclear weapons, that threaten not just Israel, although they are a direct threat to Israel, but threaten our friends, our other friends in the region, and because of the risk that Iran would deliver a nuclear device into the hands of terrorists, threaten us directly here as well. Once Iran gets nuclear weapons, the balance of power will change not just in the Middle East. It will change on a global basis. And it won't stop with Iran, because Saudi Arabia will get nuclear weapons, Egypt will get nuclear weapons, Turkey will get nuclear weapons, and perhaps others as well. It's what we mean by nuclear proliferation. What is the President's response in Iran and North Korea? Negotiation. Well, let's play this out just a little bit and ask, Mr. President, how will this negotiation solve the problem of Iran or North Korea's nuclear weapons? Let me see if I can sum this up with respect to Iran. Our position is we don't want Iran to have nuclear weapons, okay? Iran's position is it wants nuclear weapons. Now, what exactly is the negotiated compromise we're going to achieve between these objectives? Let's assume we could find some Iranian willing to shake hands with us, and we sat down at the negotiation table. What's the successful outcome that will lead to a resolution of the nuclear weapons program in Iran? A small Iranian nuclear weapons program? It only takes one to destroy a major American city. What are we thinking of? Now, this is something that may sound removed and abstract. It is not. It is not. These are problems that are growing even while we're not paying attention. We are justifiably concerned about the damage that Obamacare will cause our national health care system. It's one reason why it's imperative that we repeal Obamacare. But I can tell you our adversaries around the world couldn't care less what kind of health care system we have. Although I do believe if you had asked Kim Jong-il and Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, they both would have favored the public option. They are going to take advantage of American weakness, and they see in the White House today weakness. The President believes that what is provocative in the world is American strength, that it's American strength, that feeling of American exceptionalism, that creates adversaries for us around the world. He is 180 degrees wrong. What's provocative to our adversaries around the world is American weakness. And we are being very provocative today. It's time we got a real president in the White House. And it's time we got a president less concerned about being a citizen of the world and more concerned about defending America. Let's remember what one former president said back when he was Secretary of State, John Quincy Adams, in his 4th of July speech in 1821, said the following: "Wherever the standard of freedom and independence has been or shall be unfurled, there will be America's heart, her benedictions, and her prayers. But she goes not abroad in search of monsters to destroy. She is the well-wisher to the freedom and independence of all. She is the champion and vindicator only of her own." Thank you very much. Thank you.
Ambassador Bolton, thank you so much. As the ambassador said, there's now an opportunity for your questions, and in order that our worldwide viewing audience, hanging on every word via the live stream online, can see and hear your questions and your smiling face, as well as the ambassador's responses, we'd ask that you would stand and raise a hand so that those who have the microphone can bring you the mic. Wait until you have the mic, and then you'll be able to be both seen and heard as they watch us over in Beijing and Tehran this morning.
Okay, over here. If you could go to where the microphones are, because I can't really see through the lights, but I do see one over there, and I'll try and recognize you there.
Well, Ambassador, what is your assessment of our capability with our nuclear capability to defeat these weapons? It seems to me that all I hear is that Obama is trying to weaken our anti-nuclear defense, which strikes me as the most idiotic thing he's proposed yet.
Well, there's a lot of competition for that honor, I'm afraid, but it is unmistakably clear that the president's real objective is to get to what some call nuclear zero, to have a world free of nuclear weapons. Now, again, on the surface, that sounds fine, but if you got a world where there were no more nuclear weapons, it would still be a world with chemical weapons, with biological weapons, with terrorist fanatics. In fact, I think it's almost beyond dispute that America's nuclear umbrella has been a foundation of international peace and security since the end of World War II. And for us to give that up it would be the height of folly. But the administration believes, again, since it's America's strength that's provocative, that if we gave up our nuclear weapons program, the Ayatollahs in Tehran would say, well, great, that's fantastic, no need for us to have nuclear weapons. They would say exactly the opposite, as would many others around the world. The United States has a need not only to defend itself, to have a nuclear deterrent, but we have treaty obligations and commitments all around the world to provide our nuclear umbrella over the NATO alliance, over allies like Japan and South Korea and Australia. We have a very different need and obligation than the Russians do, and to tie ourselves to any fixed limit with them, or at least any limit of parity, I think is a big mistake. And this doesn't even get into the damage that we're suffering that people don't pay attention to, as our capability to design new nuclear weapons deteriorates, our ability to test nuclear weapons has been on hold for 20 years. The president is trying to push through another treaty, the so-called Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, that would preclude us from testing at all. A huge mistake, one that was defeated in the Senate back in the Clinton administration. Like the law of the sea treaty, this is another bad idea that's coming back to haunt us. And we don't have the long enough view, I think, to recognize that these capabilities that the United States has are things that can be lost. Just as we have lost in the past few weeks the capacity to put Americans in space. Now think about that. I don't mean to date myself or anybody in the room, but I remember President Kennedy saying we were going to get a man on the moon and return him safely in that decade, ahead of the Soviets, by the way, and we did it. And now, how do we get Americans in space? We rent space on Russian rockets. It is unbelievable. Now that's not only President Obama's fault. It is a collective failure of the Washington establishment. And it's something that's going to cost us dearly, I think, over the long term. They're not slowing down in China's space program. You can bet on that. So just imagine 4 more years of Obama policy. I don't believe there's ever an inevitable point where we tip out of control. Margaret Thatcher demonstrated in Britain, no matter how bad things look, a country that's determined can get itself out of that kind of hole. But the deeper hole you're in, the harder it is to get out of, and that's the direction of this president. Okay, over here. Whoever
The North Atlantic Alliance, past century, has been the core of our foreign policy and defense policy. And it looks like, to me, that Obama has set it up for defeat in Libya, of all places. In other words, we could have stayed out or we could have gone in to win, but we went in just enough to lose. Your comment.
I agree. You know, you're absolutely right. Look, he went in for the wrong reason. He went in pursuit of an ideological objective called the responsibility to protect. It sounds very humanitarian, and Americans are humanitarian people, except the responsibility to protect ultimately means putting Americans on the line in regions of the world where we have no interest at all. Now, I think it was the right thing once Gaddafi threatened to return to international terrorism, and we all remember his destruction of Pan Am 103, killing 270 people over Lockerbie, Scotland in December of 1988, 189 of them Americans. I think removing him was a legitimate objective. But we have messed this thing up in a way that is almost impossible to calculate. Went in for the wrong objective, started out with a substantial assault, and then basically stood back and said the British and the French will handle this, which over the past 4 months they have not done, to the point where they are now saying, with our approval, we could imagine a negotiated settlement where Gaddafi stays in Libya. Now, this is a prescription for more civil war, and by the way, for the death of more innocent Libyan civilians, which was the reason the president went in to begin with. So we could end up with the worst of both worlds. Gaddafi's still in power in part of the country, and rebels that we have no real confidence in control of another part of the country, potentially a condition of anarchy where al-Qaeda or other terrorist groups could set up bases of operation. And if, at the end of all this, we have failed to remove Gaddafi, this will be a terrible blow at the credibility of the United States and the NATO alliance, which is already in jeopardy in Afghanistan. So I think that if our adversaries around the world are watching what's happening in Libya, they will conclude again that America is failing, that it has weak leadership, that its capabilities are weak, and that therefore the environment for them to try and take advantage of American weakness is growing more favorable. And this can only have a ripple effect around the world to our decided detriment. Yes, sir, right here.
Ambassador Bolton, could you comment on the need for Israel to have secure borders? I was astounded when our president said that Israel should go back to the 1967 borders and then negotiate land swaps from there for their security. And when Prime Minister Netanyahu was here in the United States, and he quoted the verse around the Liberty Bell, proclaim freedom throughout the land. And of course, that's an Old Testament verse, and he said that America's liberty and Israel's liberty share a common root. Could you comment on why it is in America's best interest for Israel to have secure borders?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a very, very critical point. Israel is often the target in international organizations of those that basically would like to see it eliminated, in part because it serves as a surrogate target for the United States. Rather than attack us directly, it's much easier to go after the Israelis. And many of the policies they pursue, much of their military doctrine, is essentially the same as ours. The president has waffled on this question of what he really sees as the outcome, as he does on so much. But as you rightly point out, the president said originally that Israel had to go back to the 67 borders with agreed-upon swaps. And then he tried to define that as meaning something else. Well, let's run through this. To be an agreed-upon swap, the Palestinians have to agree to it. Okay, so if they don't agree to it, then there are no swaps. So you're back at the 67 borders. And you can try and obscure that all you want. That's what he said. That has never been the position of the United States. Going back to Lyndon Johnson in Resolution 242 of the Security Council after the Six-Day War in 1967, which set up the land for peace paradigm, everybody understood when that resolution was adopted that Israel was not going to go back to the 1967 borders. And every president since Johnson until this one has upheld that. If we can't leave Israel with secure and defensible borders and not have a terrorist state on the other side of those borders, we have failed not just Israel, we have failed the United States in a very major way. So this is something not simply out of loyalty to a good ally like Israel that we have to take this position, but because a defeat for the United States in giving Israel a future of peace and security will simply embolden those who want to endanger America further. It seems to me just about as clear as it can be. Okay, I don't want to get too far behind here. We'll take one or two more questions. Yes, sir, over here.
Final thing on the Obama and Israel situation. If tomorrow morning Obama found out that Monday morning Iran was going to have the capability of having an actual nuclear bomb, A, would he stop it? And B, if Israel took action, do you think Obama would support Israel?
Look, we are in a very unattractive position with respect to the Iranian nuclear weapons program. After fiddling around for 10 years with diplomacy and sanctions, the Iranians are on the verge of getting this capability. I think the most likely outcome as of now is they will get nuclear weapons, and much sooner rather than later. There's only one way to stop them, and that's to cut their control over the nuclear fuel cycle at one or more key points. That's not a very attractive alternative. But Iran with nuclear weapons is a lot less attractive an alternative. So either the United States is going to have to do it or Israel is going to have to do it. Under this president, there is zero chance of the United States doing that. Because in part, the administration believes that while it wouldn't be a good thing to have Iran with nuclear weapons, we can live with it because we can contain and deter Iran. I think that's ridiculous. I think when you have a regime that believes that life in the hereafter is a lot more desirable than life on Earth, and getting there as quickly as possible is desirable, is not a regime you can deter very easily. So this is a problem once they get nuclear weapons. So that leaves Israel. And the administration, our administration, has already put unbelievable pressure on Israel not to take military action. Now, I think that, as we saw from Congress's overwhelmingly favorable reaction to Prime Minister Netanyahu's speech, specifically when he talked about the Iranian nuclear weapons threat, that Israel's support in this country, if it did use force, as it did correctly in 1981 when it destroyed Saddam Hussein's nuclear reactor outside of Baghdad, and as it did correctly in September of 2007 when it destroyed a nuclear reactor in Syria being built by the North Koreans, that Israel would be justified. And I'll just predict, we don't know when this will happen. I think Iran's capacity is very close to achieving its objective and that Israel doesn't have much time. But I would just say this: if we wake up one morning and find that in its own legitimate self-defense, Israel has attacked Iran's nuclear weapons program, we should all come immediately to Israel's defense.
Mr. Ambassador, the chair will take the prerogative of the last question. You quoted John Quincy Adams, Secretary of State, later President, son of a president. I saw a National Review cover story about you a few months ago that you're thinking of a run for president. I listened to you this morning. I'm hearing a future Secretary of State or maybe a future president. Indeed, on the straw poll ballot that we will cast at the summit tomorrow, I see your name listed. What about this presidential boomlet, Ambassador Bolton?
Well, thank you very much for raising that. Look, I've never run for public office in my life, so this is an enormous decision, but I feel very passionately that the protection of the United States and the world is a president's highest obligation. And we've got a president now who's not doing that. And I would say this also, whoever the Republicans nominate, there will come an evening in September, October of 2012 where there's going to be 60 or 90 minutes of debate on foreign and defense policy. And by that time, President Obama will have pretended to be commander-in-chief for almost 4 years. He's a good actor. And if the Republican nominee is not prepared to go head-to-head with him and show that that nominee is capable of leading us in a challenging world, Obama will emerge from that debate with a bigger advantage. We have got to be ready for that, whoever our nominee is. So please keep that in mind. Thank you very much.